All right. So this week we're going to talk about how the Great Depression really affected fiscal policy, which is government spending, and everything related to government spending, revenue, and then what the outlays are. Um, and so there really was this moment of the Great Depression really was a inflection point where the U.S. government really totally changed everything. That they did around. I mean, they changed a lot of things, but it really kind of set a precedent for how U.S. fiscal policy would be going forward. And many of the programs with us today that are, a large part of the federal government's budget, come from the Great Depression. Okay, and so there's two ideas or two things that kind of changed in the thinking about the role of government or government spending is the ability to use government spending to stimulate the economy, and then also generally what is the role of government, like uh, uh, what should they provide. Okay, and so this idea that the government could step in with spending by pumping money or into the economy via purchases, essentially infrastructure spending, job spending, relief spending on things like welfare and aid to the elderly. All of that all of that stimulus, that idea comes from Keynes. Before Keynes, the idea was, okay, when you spend government money, that's going to crowd out private spending. So if the government is giving money to the elderly, that would have been done privately before via a charitable organization or via a church. So there's really no effect of the government spending. It's just pushing out the private money. Essentially, just the same thing would have happened. The money just would have come from somebody different. Now, Keynes, who's I think there's a podcast this week on Keynes. Keynes, who's perhaps the most famous economist ever, him or Adam Smith, I would say. Um, Keynes essentially says during downturns, the government needs to step in and kind of jolt the economy back to life, and then this jolt will ripple through the rest of the economy and have a multiplying effect. And this is called the Keynesian multiplier. Like every dollar spent will stimulate private spending. The extent to which would be, a higher multiplier would stimulate even more spending. So how influential was Keynes? So during the Great Depression, like he was out there like pounding the pavement, advocating for his ideas, and he met with many of the leaders of the U.S. and the UK. Now, his ideas were not implemented explicitly, so it's kind of one of those things where with the response to the Great Depression from the U.S. government, which was the New Deal, once Roosevelt comes to office in 1932, we have this massive expansion of federal spending called the New Deal. Keynes is saying, like, the federal government should be spending, to stimulate the economy. It's like, even though what the U.S. is doing is looks like what Keynes was advocating for, it's not like there was a one-to-one relationship. It's not like Keynes went to FDR and said, you should do this. FDR just kind of, and then FDR then did that. FDR just kind of did this on his own. Like when FDR comes to power, it's like this was the path he chose to take. Keynes, is basically saying like, yes, this is good, but you actually need to do it even more. Like you should be spending more than you are. So there's not like a one-to-one relationship between Keynes's ideas and what happened in the Great Depression. Now, subsequently, after the Great Depression, Keynes' ideas were taken up by many economists and policymakers, and such that when we have the 2008 financial crisis, many people are arguing for a stimulus, for a Keynesian stimulus to get the economy back on track. So here we have Paul Krugman in the New York Times essentially taking the Keynesian position of, hey, we need a big stimulus, big government spending to get the economy back on track. All right, so let's go back to the Great Depression and see exactly what happened with the New Deal. All right, so FDR takes office in 1932. Or he's elected in 1932, and things are precarious. We have high unemployment. We have this massive decline in real output in GDP. Housing wealth had fallen significantly. Um, Banks are going out of business. And so this is a moment of extreme economic and social unrest, where there is an opportunity for a paradigm shift in what was going on. A revolution per se of a political organization or economic organization. So in many countries you have this. This is when many European countries turn towards fascism. Um, and so in the U.S., we had similar dangers. Like you could turn towards fascism, or a complete remaking of the economic system and turn towards socialism. So there's a danger of a revolution, a complete transformation of the American project, of what had come before, a complete replacement of American institutions with something totally different. And so FDR essentially is trying everything to get the economy back on track. And what he's also doing is trying to assuage any fears. He's trying to project calm, trying to project that, hey, things will improve. Psychologically, that's the psychological effect of that should not be underrated. Like, people think of economics as kind of maybe a science, when there's a whole psychological aspect to it as well, in terms of how people perceive what's happening, and that influences their investment decisions. And therefore, you can almost, it's almost like the power of positive thinking, where just by thinking that things are going to get better, in many ways they can get better. Okay, so if you, like, for instance, I'll just give an example. Okay, so let's think you think the economy is going to improve in the future. Okay, and let's say you have a small coffee shop like my sister-in-law does. So if she thinks things are going to get better, she may do a bunch of investments in her coffee shop, buy a better machine, hire more workers, completely redo the inside. That investment then starts spurring economic growth. She has to hire all the people to do that. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's like, if you think things are going to get better, people start investing, undertaking long-term projects, and lo and behold, they do get better. If things are going worse, they don't make the investments, they pull back, maybe, and then things do get worse. So there's a weird psychological effect with how the economy moves. And many of the role of kind of these people in positions of power, like FDR as the president or the chairman of the Fed, is to project that sort of calm, like, hey, things are under control, things are going to get better, because they want that level of investment to stay the same, or they want people to undertake those long-term projects. They want the factories to undertake the improvements, to people to invest in education, hoping that things will return to on track. So FDR is doing, that's a bit of a tangent, but FDR is doing kind of the psychological work with the fireside chats, and then he's also essentially using whatever tools he can to try a bunch of different things. He's basically throwing the kitchen sink at it. Now, broadly, the aims are these three: relief. So we're going to provide some relief for the people who are adversely affected by the Great Depression. So we are going to provide, that's unemployed workers, that's the elderly, that's people who are already living in poverty, that's farmers whose crops who's fallen, that's people who've been foreclosed upon. So it's like, let's get relief to those who are immediately hit hard by this downturn. Recovery. So let's get the economy back on track. Let's get our growth back up. And then reform. Let's take a look at what went wrong here. Like, why did our economy go so bad? Let's implement some reforms so that it doesn't happen. Let's try to learn from this, and let's try to so it doesn't happen again. Okay, so here what I've noted here are the big New Deal policies. Okay, so we have Social Security, which is pensions for the elderly. This is with us today, and I believe it's the largest component of government spending. And essentially, it's like the idea of, like, elder poverty is a disgrace, and we should make sure that the elderly population has enough money to live on, and that is basically Social Security. The idea is you pay into it, and then you get it when you retire. Mechanically, how it works is essentially the people that are paying into it are paying the people who are the elderly to get that pension. Then we have a variety of works projects. These are, to building parks, schools, public buildings, roads. Many times, if you actually go around in LA and like look at some sort of public building or public work of art, you can find out that it was built during the Great Depression by the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Essentially, this is, let's provide some jobs for people who have lost them. You could think of the Fed as the lender of last resort. Essentially, here's the government as the employer of last resort for people who can't find work. We have the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And this is, so we have deflation, prices are falling. This is affecting farmers substantially. And so here they're trying to prop up agricultural prices, produce prices, that sort of thing. And they're actually paying farmers to not farm. The idea being if there's less supply, that will increase prices. Now, this program has been analyzed extensively and actually finds that it had negative effects on farmers and growth in general. And this especially hurt low-income farmers. Okay, we have the HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation, which later becomes the FHA. This organization is designed to help out homeowners. So these are homeowners who can't pay their mortgage. So essentially what the government does is they buy up these mortgages that the banks would have foreclosed on. And they say, okay, now you owe the federal government. Instead of owing the bank, you owe the federal government. We're going to redo your mortgage so you have longer to pay it. And we're not going to foreclose on you. So it's relief to homeowners. They also implement unemployment insurance. Again, this is still with us. So that if you lose your job, you get a portion of your income for a certain period of time, 6 months to a year, basically, to give you that cushion so you don't starve or lose your house before you find a new job. Obviously, this is in play with the pandemic. Many people are on unemployment insurance. Many people I know, my brother is on unemployment, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law. And then we have the FDIC, which is designed to help the banks. So the banks are collapsing. We covered this actually last lecture. What the government is saying is we're going to guarantee deposits. So if the bank goes under, you people who put your money in the bank, we got you. And as we mentioned lastly, this is like an implicit subsidy to the banks that's saying, hey, behave how you want. You don't have to worry about covering your deposits if you go under, because we will cover those. So these are kind of the big. You can look at you can look up the New Deal and you'll see everything they did. There's lots of things. What I've tried to done here is I've tried to cull the most significant programs, and especially the ones that are still with us in some form. The FDIC, unemployment insurance, and Social Security are all directly still with us. The HOLC has another legacy that we'll go over later. These ones are not with us in that explicit of a form, but they also have legacies that, again, we will go into right now or in the next video.